everybody, and thank you for joining us on another episode of PropTalk, a property management podcast that is powered by Resman. I'm Elizabeth Francisco, and I'm your host for today. Actually, I'm your host every day, at least for the Trailblazer episode. And today we are celebrating women entrepreneurs with my friend Barbara Savona, and she's going to be talking to us today about her own career and her journey as an entrepreneur, and just has amazing stories and wealth of knowledge that she's going to share with us today. And as a teaser, this might be part one of a two-part series, because I think we're going to have just a blast today and just celebrate and just really, happy that you're here, and thank you for agreeing to do this with me.
Thank you for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this, and we always have so much fun when we're together, so
Yes.
let it begin.
Yes, let it begin. Well, first and foremost, I've known you for years, and I was very honored that you invited me on your own podcast. So you have a podcast as well. But I wondered if you would just take a few minutes and just tell us a little bit about your company and that you're the CEO and co-founder of. Tell us a little bit about what that company is and what you do.
Okay, perfect. So I co-founded Sprout Marketing 13 years ago in 2009, so right as the recession was going on. So I feel like we're going to talk a little bit about how things are parallel now. And I co-founded the business with my best friend, my childhood best friend, Lauren. And despite everybody saying not to do that, it's been a great ride. And really, it was born out of the fact that when I was a property manager, I was trying to do it all myself. And I just remember I was newly married and way too young to be married and managing a property. And I wanted to be good at both of them, and I was struggling hard. And so years later, I thought if I could ever launch a business, it would be to try to take some of the legwork, especially in the marketing and retention, out of property managers, kind of out of their realm. And so that's the idea how Sprout was born. And now we are a marketing platform that thousands of managers use all over the world. And it saves them time, energy, and it's a place for them to kind of keep up with the basics, the grassroots, but with a really beautiful design element as well.
Wow, I think that's fantastic. Now, you said all over the world. So elaborate on that just a little bit. How far does the business sprout?
Well, predominantly the United States, but we do have communities and management companies that have properties in different places in England and things like that. And sometimes I look at our analytics, even of who's coming to our website, and it's really interesting. South America, we get a lot of traffic from there. We have people that have signed up, different kinds of, platforms there as well. So yeah, it's predominantly here, but it's got a little bit of legs everywhere.
Okay. Well, and I don't know, hopefully she'll be watching, but Victoria from Pet Screening is known for her puns. So just saying, we may have to up our pun game.
Okay, let's do it.
But I love your tagline. I think, is it watch your business sprout?
Yeah, it's watch your business sprout. I love the idea of just something so tiny turning into something big. And it was from giving managers ideas that can sprout, helping their communities sprout, and helping their careers sprout. So, and I love gardening. So that was the other sidebar.
So are you good at gardening?
I can say confidently that after 4 to 5 years of not being so good, I feel like now I'm pretty good.
We have some things in common. We both started our careers in property management and on the front line. So I love that you're trying to solve for and do something to really support and help, people's careers sprout, right? The spreading of their wings, helping, because if they perform, everybody wins, right? But understanding the dynamics of how to attract and retain our renters is so fundamental to everything that we do. And I remember, so I've looked back, this is terrible because I saved them all, but I remember being a property manager and looking back at some of my own materials. And I was a For Rent customer. I know you worked with For Rent. And all I kept thinking is, who let me put that ad out? Like, what were they thinking? Like, somebody should have said something. But just there is an art to it. And there's so many things that that you do that is just wonderful. And I know people say the greatest things about your company. You should know that.
Oh, that
And
makes
you.
me-
But
thank you.
you're very valuable. And I know how many people appreciate that.
That's something that has been very surprising is just the reception. When you start a new business in an industry, you don't know how it's going to be received. And I have to say that I'm always going to be forever grateful for people like you. I mean, when we first met, it was 10 plus years ago, and you were in your own trenches and always taking the time to encourage and mentor. And so that has been my experience with this industry, which is why the need, I
Yep.
feel that same need to give back to the others.
Oh, well, that's great. And you do a great job of that. So, thinking about your own story from the front lines, um, how do you go from, because you didn't make the leap directly to starting Sprout, right? So, kind of what was that journey like from you to go from front lines to starting your own business and such a big undertaking?
Yeah, it really was. I think it was all the experiences before. So property management was an accidental, career path. I was leasing
No,
apartments. All right. I
never
know.
heard that
I'd love
before.
to have like a more unique story in that, but what I did do is I tried to pick up everything that I possibly could along the way. And then I was actually picked out by an individual owner who was launching a magazine here that was a competitor to For Rent Media Solutions at the time. I didn't, have any
Okay.
affiliation. And he had been shopping all these communities, and then they really courted me to try to get them to basically run
Mhm.
operations for this business. I had no experience. My parents are entrepreneurs, so I had like that in my blood. I wanted to be an
Okay.
entrepreneur. I knew that. When he offered me the position, I was excited and nervous. Here, it was in Dallas, and both of them, it
Mm.
was two partners. They took me under their wings and they literally showed me every piece of the business. Nothing, they held nothing back. So we were doing distribution for magazines, client acquisition, building out a product at the same time, all the challenges and the pain
Mhm.
points that come with a business. And they literally, I mean, I don't know what they were thinking. I was like 20 something years old and I'm like, what are y'all doing? But they never left my side. And piece by piece, they showed that to me. And so that was the love that then developed. And when the opportunity came for me years later, I had a little bit of a break in just I could make a change. I talked to my husband and I said, I feel like this is the right time for me to
Mhm.
do something on my own. I had since then ended up working for Rent Media Solutions, which is now CoStar. I loved working with them, but I always knew my path was going to be something a little bit different. And I wasn't really wanting to be part of the corporate America as it is today.
Mm.
And so that's when I decided to launch Sprout Marketing. If I can, real quick, my grandparents are in Germany and
Mm.
we had taken like a family vacation and we're sitting, they were farmers. So they have like a farm, a piece of property on a farm, and it was nighttime. You could see all the stars. And I was sitting on the roof of their barn and I just thought to myself, this is the year that I am ready to make a leap. Like, this is the year. And sometimes I think getting away from your environment and your
Mhm.
surroundings, you start to see that there's this whole other world out there and
Yeah.
things become possible that you didn't think. So that was the impetus and kind of the launching pad for me going and deciding to start Sprout later that year.
So, what was the early days of starting the business like? Like, what was when you decided to start Sprout? What was the goal? What was the intention? What were you trying to solve for?
So I was trying to solve for just the fact that there was not a lot of, people were expected to market their communities, but
Mhm.
other than doing an ILS, there was no other service there. So
Right.
I sold advertising, and every year, as it goes with advertising, your packages get more expensive,
Mhm.
they get larger. And I, in good conscience with my clients, it's like they had enough leads. They just didn't know what to do with the leads after that. And so there was this kind of breakdown in customer service. And I didn't know what the product was going to be at the time,
Okay.
but I wanted to bridge something that included design, included marketing materials, but also like training on the principles. I kept seeing like people are missing the basics, like just the basics. How do we make it fun? How do we make it beautiful? So that was the idea, but it took a lot of iterations
Mhm.
before it became what it is today.
Now, you're a co-founder, correct?
Mhm.
And this is your high school friend or your
Yeah.
childhood
Yeah.
friend, right, Lauren? Um, I'm curious about when you set out to start the business. Did you have a plan? Like, what was it like for you're identifying this gap potentially that you're
Mhm.
seeing out in the space at the time. So, when someone's starting a business, did you have like a 3, 5 year plan, even a high level? Was it napkin math? Like, or did you just dive in and say, let's see what happens?
It was a little bit of that. It was a little bit of the dive in. So like I think I told you this a little bit. I remember when I first met my husband. 6 months later, we were married. I'm kind
Mhm.
of a dive in kind of girl when I see what I like, and so it worked out in my marriage and it's worked out in my business. But it really was that I had a few really key clients that I had
Okay.
worked with at Ferrant, and they'd always wanted me to help troubleshoot. So I felt like I was always more than an ad consultant. They'd say, "We're really struggling at this community. Just come like set eyes on it." And so a few of them became really close friends. And one day I was with one of these. She was the VP of her company, and I said, I just have this idea. And we were sitting in her car having Sonic drinks, and I said, what do you think? She's like, I think whatever you're going to do, you're going to be successful. And it was so interesting because I just needed that little push from someone that knew
Mhm.
me, even though like I knew myself. I was still really young, but having
Yeah.
somebody else see the potential was huge. And so there was actually no plan. I started Sprout without my partner at first. In fact, I actually started with a different co-founder, and it was going to be just a consulting agency. And she decided a few months in, she wanted to go back to school, and she was like, "Look, you run with the business." And one day I was pacing in front of my house and I was on the phone with Lauren, like I did every single day for years, my best friend. And I said, "Man, Lauren," I said, "I can get the jobs, but I can't keep up with invoicing. I can't keep up with like getting the next job. It's like I just can't run the business." And she was complaining about the lady that she worked for. She's like, "All she does is sell, and she never then brings me her receipts. Everything's so unorganized." And I said, "Look, together we could be the perfect woman. So, do you want to do this?" And it took a little more convincing because I came from like the entrepreneurial background. Like I knew about
Okay.
bootstrapping. She didn't. And she was a little bit more fearful, but I think we had such a good relationship as
Mhm.
friends that she finally decided to take the leap. And I feel like that was really when Sprout was born
And what year was that?
in 2009. So I started it
Oh,
early that year.
there's nothing going on that
Yeah,
year.
no, nothing major. Just the time to leave your corporate job that pays
Yeah,
really well.
nothing like starting a job, starting a new career, starting a business in the middle of a great
No,
recession.
no, nothing like it. And honestly, it was the best thing ever
Yep.
because the way our price point was and people needed it. They wanted to get back to basics. So it worked in our favor. I had no idea that it was going to, though. So there is something to say just about how timing is, and
Mhm.
that worked for us.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you said about getting back to basics,
Hmm.
because I can't tell you, I'm a little bit older. That's all I'm going to say
Never.
for our audience. But so many times in my career and working with other people and hearing their own stories, inevitably somebody always says the phrase getting back to basics, coming back around to basics. The tools maybe in which we deliver some of those basics may change, especially with the onsets of technology,
Hmm.
but it tends to always come back to the basic fundamentals. And it's funny because when I think about like going from property management, same for you, in property management and into for rent and starting your own business, the fundamentals of business I think are generally the same.
Yeah.
What do you think about
Oh
that?
my gosh, I do. The one caveat that I would say to that,
Mhm.
and if I could give any piece of advice, is I don't think anybody treats their money like it's their money unless it's their money. And
Hmm.
I think that when it changed, that my time and my money was literally coming out of my pocket.
Mhm.
I ran business very tight already before that. But it did change a little bit. I started to really see that there was only so much both to go around and they were both going to deplete me in one way or another. And
Right.
so, but you're right, the fundamentals, people, leadership, operations, once you have those basics down, whether you're doing it for yourself or for someone else,
Mm.
you can master those while you're working somewhere else.
Yep. Well, I think you just dropped our first nugget. I don't know if it's a pun, Victoria, but it's definitely a nugget. And that is really about when you can put yourself in the mindset of the responsibilities and the accountability of working with other people's money as if it's your own, otherwise known as your fiduciary
Mhm.
responsibility. But you're right. I don't recall hearing that a lot um, in the earlier days of my career. I think just because of where I came from organically, I was very frugal. I came
Yeah.
just my grandparents were in the not the Great Recession, but the actual Great Depression, and it impacted the way we viewed everything, like for the whole family. So, I think that's a great point because I hadn't thought about it that way. But yeah, when you can run it like you own it, but the responsibilities of it, not just the title, not just showboating about it, but really understanding the responsibility that comes with that, that's how you can really advance your careers and do great things.
100%. I mean, I totally relate to that. And I think maybe you just brought up something. If you come from a family that didn't have a lot of money, like I remember we got to go eat on Sundays, that was our
Hmm.
treat. And back then you could have a
Oh,
family of four that was, having a meal for under $20. But I remember my mom would be like, "Hey, today we're all getting water." And that was
okay.
the deal. It was
Hmm.
like you could eat out, but we're getting water.
Yeah.
And the lesson there was, hey, money isn't always available. And so I think that mindset, if you didn't learn it necessarily by running a business, you might have learned it because of the way that you were raised, and you can pull from any of those experiences and take those into business.
Yep. No, you have a great point. I'm just curious about your this idea and what you've expressed about you just knew you were going to be an entrepreneur. Like you wanted to be an entrepreneur and you referenced that you have family members that are entrepreneurs. Talk to me a little bit about that. Like what does that mean to you? Like how did you know? Because mine wasn't like that. I
Okay.
I was a fell into, voluntold, um, built something to solve a problem that turned out to have a lot of value. But I didn't set out to do that.
Okay. I think for me, I saw how our life changed as my dad's career developed. So he started as a maintenance man in, San Antonio, Texas, and had a manager that just kept giving him more responsibilities, and he just kept rising to the challenge. And so he
Mm,
became maintenance for several communities. People would come to him, and eventually he ended up starting his own construction business. And my mom was just like, my mom was good with the money, my dad was good with the people, and it worked. And our house and our lifestyle equated to the business growing. So,
mhm.
we started in something very small. I mean, I drove by the other day and I'm like, I cannot believe this is where we started. It was, a trailer park. I mean, it was nothing fancy. And every time that there was another level of growth,
Mhm.
we were able to move up. When my dad started his own company, we bought our first house. So for me, housing, the industry, it's just so intimately related to my
Mhm.
life, like to just my experiences. And I also saw that we could do things that other families couldn't. Like my parents were savers and we could take long vacations, not because we had so much money, because we
Mhm.
really didn't, but it was because they prioritized those things. And because of my dad's schedule, being an entrepreneur, he could maneuver those things. And I
Right.
just thought, I want that freedom. I want the ability to change where I'm at right now and to be able to kind of craft my own story
Mm.
based on how hard I work.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a great story. And it made me think about even with some of where my adult kids are today. And I think they probably saw some of the same things that you saw growing up. Might explain why they've gone down the path that they have
Yeah.
and definitely have more of that entrepreneurial spirit themselves, even while working other jobs.
Yeah.
So um no, thank you for sharing that. So because you had that exposure, right? And you got to see the realities of starting a business. There's people who think they want to roll their sleeves up and get in the midst of it, but saying you want it, and I'm still not sure why it's so alluring because it's hard,
So hard.
and not everyone's cut out for it. Um, and I think about like over time when we always joke inside the company at Resmond. I think sometimes I'm the one that's supposed to interview you to talk you out of the job
Hmm.
because I need you to understand how hard this is going to be and make sure that you really want to do it. The rewards are great, and they are, but you work for them. And so I'm thinking, like, from your perspective, was there anything in starting the business that weren't prepared for or was harder than you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, I'm a people pleaser at heart. And so when you start a business and you're also eager to make it work, you say yes to absolutely everything. You are grateful for every opportunity and almost to the point like, you and I talked a little bit about this at lunch, grateful to the point of feeling like you're forever indebted to this person that gave you an opportunity and
Hmm.
sometimes to your own detriment. So at the beginning, I was saying yes to everything and then had a team that had to fulfill on my yeses. So that
Hmm.
was something I didn't expect to be a problem. I thought, yeah, you just say yes and you work hard and that's what you have to do. And I think to a certain extent you do at the beginning. I
Hmm.
do think that. Um, but as I matured, I learned that not every client was for me. We weren't for every single person. Not every opportunity was the right opportunity. And I don't know. I mean, I think there's some people that maybe intuitively know those things. I just didn't, I
Hmm.
didn't. And it made me feel so good to walk out of a meeting and be like, you know what? We don't do that, but we can. And then later I'm like, you can't be all things to everyone,
Yep.
and that was a hard lesson learned at the beginning.
Yes. Well, I hope this makes you feel a little better. You're not the only one. And I think what I've come to understand, I relate to everything you just said. But there are several books, articles talking about those journeys
Hmm.
and scale and focus are something I think every entrepreneur has to go through. And I don't know that when you start, I don't know how you can really have an understanding of where that breaking point is going to be. You just, I think if you think about advice going forward, like if somebody was starting this today, if I could go back in time, I think I would fine tune that sooner and really start to just focus on it. Just pay attention to like what you said.
Hmm.
What a burden or what are we putting on the backs of the company that's not sustainable? Because you don't want to burn people out. but it is a common problem with entrepreneurs. Like I think we all go through it.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad I'm not alone.
You're not alone. In fact, there's books written about it. And some of it you have to go through.
You
I
do.
think there's lessons learned. And I think, looking at multifamily, sometimes I to this day, I swear, multifamily can teach you how to stretch some things. Nothing against our industry, but it can. And I think, thank goodness that I came up that way, because I don't know that we could have done what we did to start this company if I hadn't been in those shoes.
Oh, yeah. Your story. I mean, I still think about that. It's inspiring to think about. Really, you make do with the resources you have. And that is a skill set too. I think on the flip side, talking about people pleasing, one of the things I think I did get right at the beginning that I didn't realize I was actually getting right is I never asked my team to do anything that I wasn't willing to do.
Yep.
I always stretched my team. I always put them in situations that were slightly uncomfortable because I knew it was what we needed to do. A lot of them were not, they were creatives. They weren't salespeople. But at the beginning, you're creative and you're a salesperson and you're, cleaning up the office at the end of the day. And that's just what you do. But I think about that and I think, but I was always willing to do it with them. And so now a lot of the times the newer employees, they didn't have to, I think about going to a trade show, setting it up, then running and speaking and being that person, then coming back and working it, going to all the events, then breaking it down and going home and working those leads. And that was like 3 people doing that. And sometimes we laugh, we're like, how did we do it? And it's like, you did it because that was what was necessary at the time. And we have so many fun memories. But now I'm like, there is no way this girl could do that today. Like, I need help.
Okay, so I'm curious for somebody that used to, since we've walked in those same shoes, and there's a lot of people listening in our podcast that I know have done the same. Do we all go through a phase of being the trade show Nazi?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I don't know how many steamers I could have bought. Like, that wrinkle is not acceptable.
No, I mean, and that's the thing. When it's your baby, that's the other weird thing nobody talks about is, there's this person that, you're educating and you're this person that you are, but it's also your business. And so then there's like these hard feelings about like, this is how I want it to look. And at the beginning, those were very rigid for me. It was like, this is how I want things, And so, yes, I was that person and I've had to totally chill out. And I feel like I have, I have in time. But yeah, I think we've all worn that hat and the details matter. And they really, at the beginning, when you're trying to put your best foot forward, it's like every detail matters.
Yes. Amen to that. You couldn't say that any better. So what would you say is like the biggest challenge? Other, like outside of the beginning, like what others, or any big challenges that you've had to face since then that you've had to overcome?
Well, I think right now the weird challenge is that I am both the CEO of the company and also the face of the company. And I know you've been in those shoes. And it's a weird place to be because, I have to have enough mental space to say, where's this company going? And also to show up for my team. I don't want to be good for everybody else and then not be good for my team. And there's been times that I've been good for everybody else and just not been as available as I wanted.
Yeah.
Like that's the juggling act is what's helped me with that is I have a business partner and best friend who is operations. And so we help each other. But that's still, even now, as like personal branding is even getting bigger and is even more important. It's like, how do I navigate doing all of those things and still having enough time, space, energy to really forecast what's ahead? Because really that's where I need to be. But the other part is important too. It's just not losing sight of which one is the one that's really driving results.
Yep. I think that you just categorized what, for those listening, the differences between working on the business and working in the business.
Yeah.
And, that's probably something that a lot of founders go through is where to let go. But you're right. You can't, especially in scale, you can't continue to be that. And I know, thank goodness we have, several people within Bresman now that are out in the market and doing great things. That's a shameless plug for Cocktails and Compliance. I swear, I
it's
listen.
so funny.
It is pickups, but such great information.
Yeah.
But it's great to see that so many, when you can surround yourself with people who are just as passionate about what you started with the vision, like when you can, because you go through different phases, right? People come into the company because when you're 5, 10, 12, there's a certain familial atmosphere. There's a way of just interacting with one another. But as you start to scale, some of that has to change. And I think, and I'm just curious about your thoughts on this. one of the things that was hard for me is in the early days, I think we put people in positions that were not the best fit out of loyalty to things they had done where they
Mhm.
were a good fit, and they really struggled. Um, and maybe didn't make that journey as well. And sometimes to the detriment of the business. So have you like how do you look at staffing and people that start with you in the business and how do you grow them and their talents?
Yeah, so
That
I
was a lot of
I
questions.
broke all the rules. Like they said, don't work with your best friend. I did. They're like, don't hire friends and family. I did. At the beginning, that is what you do. But
Mhm.
I also hired an executive coach pretty early on to coach me as the CEO and Lauren as the CFO and kind of
Okay.
COO. And he started really helping us to identify how you hire for the fit of the job. You don't hire and then make the person fit into the role. And what really shifted for me, it was all about alignment. It wasn't talking about being mean or being, tough, because I always thought that was like being hard nosed if you were
Mhm.
too. And what he really showed me is he's like, if it's not in alignment with the company values and they're not a natural fit for that, they're going to constantly feel behind. And so you're not doing them, you're doing them a disservice and you're doing the company a disservice. And then he also taught me that as the CEO, my job, my responsibility to my team is to provide them and surround them with A players. And the
Yep.
second that you stop doing that, you're
Mhm.
telling your A players on your team that they're not that important to you. And so, we talked about this that loyalty is super important. And I just want my team to know that I'm always rooting for them. So if my hiring decisions are that way, then
Mhm.
that's how we do it. And so, enough experience now, 13 years in, you kind of start to know who's going to fit and who's not. We still get it wrong sometimes, but definitely we write out everything for that role. And just like you, it's almost like the
Yep.
gauntlet. Like put them
Mhm.
through the gauntlet. If they can't handle the interview process, they can't handle the day to day.
Yes. I love what you said about A players. Have you ever read the book? We're going into the PropTalk book club now.
Oh,
Um,
we're just crossing all the
I
different
know we're
boundaries.
doing all kinds of things. Have you ever read the book from Netflix, the Netflix No Rules Rules?
um, I don't know if I've read the book, but I've listened to the CEO's podcast of that book.
Yes. I
He's
was
incredible.
It is. And there's you would love that book and it talks about what you're saying about what are you communicating as a leader to the rest of your team? Like how you choose to set the bar and how you choose to set it across the board is so
Yeah.
important. And I love that you pointed that out because you tend to see people that pride themselves on wanting to be a top performer. You can really find them being very disengaged if they're in an environment where the bar is being lowered, right? Or not everyone's being held up
Right.
to that same level. And we should all strive to want to do that. So, yeah, I think that was great that you pointed it out. And I wondered about your own personal approach, like going back to before you started your own company, when you were in a role, right? Is whether it was for rent or, working specifically with a consulting for a management company, what's your guiding star? Like, how are you assessing yourself? Like, what was it that made you perform at the levels that you did? Like, how did you think about it for yourself?
I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, but I have always been self-motivated. And I know that
Mhm.
that's actually different people have different, how they approach things. Like some
Mhm.
people, ha- they need external motivation or some are rebels. They don't need, they do things in their own. I've always had like I want to live up to a certain identity.
Mhm.
There's an identity in my head. I don't know how else to say it. It's like there are qualities that are so important to me. So loyalty is important, appreciation's important, working hard is important. So I just wanted to always leave a situation better than I walked in. And so I wanted someone to always feel like if I was going to work for them, I wanted them to think, man, I just got way more than I thought I was going to get. Or if somebody was having a bad day, I wanted to be like, man, that was fun. That was uplifting. And I don't know why that is. I feel always like the potential of changing a dynamic by how you are in the room is I just think that's so cool that somebody can do that. And so I don't know if that answers it, but it's like that's always been kind of like how I approach any project or any relationship.
Oh, no, I think that's great. It's almost like being competitive with yourself, but this whatever this idealized image is, are you close to it?
I don't think you're ever close to
I
it.
wondered, like,
No, I
where
don't think you're ever close to it. I mean, like
So what you're really saying is you're going to be like the best granny ever.
I hope so. No, I just, you know what? There's still like a lot of interactions that I walk away from and I'm like, man, I could have done that better. Or I could have shown up better. And yeah, so I mean, I asked my husband, I've got a lot to work on.
I was gonna say she's a long ways from being a granny for the record.
I hope so.
So I'm curious about um, because you have consulted and you have so much experience working with so many people in this industry and at different stages of growth. Do you think that there's any inflection points that will make or break a business? So for maybe someone in our audience that's listening that's either in the early stages of thinking about it, is there certain points that they need to be mindful of?
Yeah, I think an owner that doesn't know when they need to hire help and the right help, I think that's a big
Mhm.
one. When you have outgrown your skill set and you're still wanting and determined to lead at the helm. I mean, we've had so many conversations where I'm like, oh my God, we're in each other's brain. I mean, I literally, that
Mhm.
was a point that we all have a cap. We really do in certain areas. And I think that in a business, if you're trying to do everything or you're trying to keep a team at a certain skill set and you want to go from here to there, if you're just stubborn that it's got to be you, that's going to
Yep.
cause a serious problem. I also think if you get in too much debt and you just can't recoup it, I mean, there's also this whole financial obligation where
Mhm.
people start kind of having to chase their tails because they're just not, able to deliver or if your product's just not good. I mean, I think too many times of product just not stacking up and once that becomes that's what customers think of, it's really hard to
Mhm.
recoup from a bad reputation. So I would say those probably 3, the owner not knowing when to advance their skill set, the financial piece of it, not having your money in order is a big thing.
Mhm.
And then the third one, not delivering on the customer
The
experience.
customer
There you
experience,
go.
yes. We're
Which I
coming
think
back
is a
to that
huge
one.
one.
Yes. Is there any mistakes that you've made along the way that, like, well, maybe let's back up. Restart. Can you tell me about a time where you made the wrong decision for your business and how you had to regroup from that? Or have you had one like
Oh, yeah, I mean, I've had plenty of those. I'm
that?
trying to think which one should I share in public. Um, I kept a client that was really high billing for us that I knew was toxic to my team for way too long. So I had a client that had started with me very early on. So back to what we were talking about, I had a very strong sense of loyalty to them,
Mhm.
but we were not aligned. I mean, I'd go into meetings with them and just even the language that they used to talk to their team would make me cringe. But the billing was there and they paid good, they paid on time, and they kept wanting to give us more business, but I knew that that was a bad for us and I kept I kept them on. And it was actually, I mean, this is an embarrassing story, but it was actually they canceled us because they got a new VP of marketing who wanted to do their own thing and they were the ones and it was so hurtful to me because here I'm like, I've been so loyal to you guys. And
Yep.
it was a really good lesson, though, like that I went way too long with that deal. I should have been the
Mhm.
one to pull out of that deal. And then, they did what they thought was best. Now, I didn't make that mistake twice when they tried to come back. We didn't take them on as a client, but that one was a hard one. And it was not just about the financial, it was also about what it was saying to my team. I was saying this client and this billing is more important. Had I put even a third of the energy that that client took to figuring out a solution to make up billing. And it was holding on too long out of fear.
Yep.
Fear, that's a big one for an entrepreneur because you got this weight of all these people. You don't
Mhm.
want to not make payroll, but sometimes you got to be okay to say, we'll figure it out. This
Yep.
is not right for us.
Yep. Well, I'm glad that you pointed out that was your example because I know we've gone through that. Um, it is it's a weight. There is a lot of fear or anxiety about having to dissolve a relationship with a paying customer,
Hmm.
right? Especially when you are in startup phase and you're in the early stages and every penny counts. But you're exactly right. And I think the message that you've delivered loud and clear so far today is about understanding the messages you're saying subliminally to your team.
Hmm.
And I think from a leadership perspective, that's probably one of the most valuable lessons you can learn. And you've done a great job today sharing that.
Well, thank you. I think sometimes we talk a lot and we say a lot, but it's like, I think your team is like kids. They watch what you do and not what you say. And so, as a leader, man, you're
Hmm.
constantly being corrected. Like, oh, this attitude I'm feeling from this team is because me as a leader, I set the pace somewhere. And a coach shared that, and that was a tough pill to swallow. He said, any issue in the business is a leadership problem. And at the time, it was just me as the leader. So I'm like, this is all my problem. But he said, either you've allowed it, you've encouraged it, or you've set the tone for it, whatever it was.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that was, and I've had many of those. I mean, I feel like I will continue to have them, but that's something we work at. It's just we're a work in progress in that area.
I love what you just said. Every problem you have in your business is a leadership problem in some form or another. And I think you're exactly right. So hope everyone was listening. Make a note. I don't know if we can turn that into a hashtag. I don't know if we're delivering on our puns, but definitely our hashtags.
We're getting, I don't know. Maybe we were beat on puns. I will say though, with that, when it hurt as like I said, a pill to swallow, what's really cool though is if it is a leadership problem, it means it's solvable.
Yes.
So how cool is that? I mean, it's like, yeah, you got to do it yourself or with your leadership team, but it means you can fix it.
Yep. And your team will respect that. I think one of the best things you can do as a leader is admit when you're at fault or you've been wrong, because we're all humans. And, I always like to say leaders are people too.
Yeah. That needs to be a t-shirt.
We make mistakes too. We are not, all knowing. But you at least have to know that you're not all knowing. Right. So, well, I think you have just, shared some great words of advice today. And I'm excited for this to air for everyone.
I'm excited too. This was so much fun. You made it so easy. You
gave
me the best questions.
Well, it's the fastest podcast ever. I hope the audience feels that way too. I'm like, how did all our time go by so fast? So just remember though, this is part 1 of 2.
I can't wait.
There's a teaser. Rumor has it you're speaking at Resmania.
That's what I've heard. I can't wait.
Okay, I'm excited. Not that I'm already not excited about Resmania, but so you guys can come join us for Resmania and get to see Barbara in action and sharing her words of wisdom. She's very gracious with her time, so I encourage you to check that out as well. But we hope that you enjoyed this episode and that you will join us again next time. So be sure to subscribe to PropTalk on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast to learn more about Resman's property management platform and to get more insight into the multifamily ecosystem. Check out myresman.com. Bye, guys. Thanks for joining us.